You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Pedro Berrocoso, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Pedro, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm very happy to have you here, and I've been looking forward to recording this episode of the podcast with you today.
Happy to be here with you today, Lasse.
So we've been speaking for a while and connected for a long time as well. You used to be in the intelligent automation space before you sort of took off the burden of being a hype man and started speaking about something that's perhaps closer to your heart, procurement, right? So let's just kick off with the first question here. How is AI changing the procurement process, Pedro?
And I think this is a good point as well to just reconnect to what you just said before. For me, it's kind of been a full circle, right? Coming from a procurement technology world and process world over years into intelligent automation, and then finding AI as a new means to really improve the function and as well the processes. And in my view, AI is actually a big hope for procurement, right? And it's a hope to truly reshape the way we go about processes for the function, so for the procurement folks themselves, but then as well for the stakeholders which are utilizing procurement processes. And if I ask you if you had good experiences with procurement processes, well, just asking you first, I'd be thinking you probably have an opinion about it, right? And maybe Lasse, what's your opinion about it?
I think actually, but maybe that's also me personally. I love procurement processes when I'm on the buying side, but I'm not so sure all the bidders love me in that process. But I think the problem is that it seems to me to be something that we create as a superfluous add-on that doesn't really connect with the operations afterwards. I think the problem is operationalizing the outcomes of the procurement process is extremely difficult because it's so complex negotiations and due diligences, and you end up not having that reflected in the services that are then produced, by workers or support functions afterwards.
And the way you feel is actually the way a lot of procurement process users feel, right? They feel it's an add-on. They feel it's a lot of compliance checks. They feel like it's complex to actually understand, but then as well to get to the grounds. And sometimes as well with that, they would be questioning the user experience and maybe questioning as well the value which procurement actually delivers with that process in mind, right? But I mean, just thinking again about the hope which AI brings to the table here, it's actually a hope to lighten up the process away from all of the highly repetitive activities. So a lot of the manual tasks which are taking place right now within the space of procurement, and really giving procurement people an ability to think more strategically and keep really the big picture in mind to enable the business priorities, which are really crucial for the function, right? And so from that perspective, together with the ability to now use the data, which is at the intersection of procurement process really being amassed and not really yet well taken care of because of the volume and the capacity needed for that, AI is truly now giving us an opportunity to bring back procurement into a more proactive stance rather than being reactive, rather than being transactional, rather than being reflecting on the past, with an ability now to project as well how spend will be actually in the future, coming along with suppliers and the business models they have in mind. So that's one aspect which I think is so crucial about the hope which procurement has for and with AI, truly transform their own position, but then as well deliver to the function value which is tangible and visible as well, right? And then,
but isn't that Pedro? You're then talking, if you talk about AI, you're talking about AI applied to all of the manual tedious processes, and then you were not talking about the value add. So are you?
yeah, well, we're coming to that, right? Because I mean, AI.
Very good.
So there's two parts to distinguish. One is what type of AI solutions are being utilized within procurement. The second one is to what part of the process, right? And if we unpick first the part of the process discussion, there's actually two distinctive parts of the procurement process. We call it usually in the fields of procurement the source to pay process, which has an upstream part which is utilized primarily by procurement folks. This is where I do spend analytics. This is where I be building my strategy strategies on, let's say, the opportunities which the spend patterns are actually shielding off to me, with an ability to then build the category strategies, build actually source to market activities, go and tender with suppliers, and then after that negotiate best price
Mm.
conditions, best delivery terms, best payment terms, and build that into a contract so that it can be utilized by the organization. That's the first part. And just looking at that part in itself, there's multiple ways you can actually utilize AI. So on the spend side, classically, you do machine learning. There's a lot of activities there where, based on the data patterns, based on the classifications you do to the data, you could actually find the treasure trove of the
Mm.
gems which you're looking for in order to, build better strategies for your supply base. On the other hand, you have as well the activities which are about sourcing activities, actually the tendering activities with suppliers, where what you do is actually having an ability with AI to follow the process in a much smarter way, have an ability potentially to use an agent to go out to market for, let's say, the simple stuff, and with that an ability to, have more capacity for the real big tenders which you potentially want to be looking after. Helping then as well with the crunching of the data is another key aspect which AI will help you with. So there's a lot of data being crunched with RFP information coming back from suppliers. You have to rate them, you have to score them, you have to make
Mm.
sense out all of the details. You have to as well find the tricky parts in these big RFPs, which many times get overseen, and with that really make sense out of the recommendations you want to then push forward in order to make a choice for the next step, which is the negotiation aspects, right? And I
Mm.
think we talked
So
about contracting before as well. So there is as well, obviously, support as well, which AI can give you in order to find the best contract terms out of a library, perhaps, which you've already established, and with that, really make the best contractual terms happen without having to necessarily reinvent the wheel every single time.
So you say a lot of things here, Pedro, right? And that's wonderful. So, but basically, what I'm thinking is there's a couple of things I'm thinking here. That is basically, is AI going to be the big difference maker, or is another technology overlooked? And what you already mentioned was you have all these machine learning techniques that you could use to get better overview of your spend and where your opportunities are, and that's something that is already valuable, but. It is AI driven, but it's not the generative AI driven, right? And then you mentioned the agents. Don't you think the agents are too far away?
Well, there are agents and there are agents, right? They are very much. I would say there's different classes of agents really already available. There are the very simple agents, which I think you and I know from the bots time, from
Mm.
robotic process automation, which are really
But it's
deterministic.
not really an agent because agents are more proactive, right? The
So
deterministic automation is a little bit
they're kind
not
of
the
the
same.
classical ones, which I think most
Yeah.
companies have already experimented with, and they have a pre-given output. So you're right, they are not necessarily the AI, they're not necessarily the cognitive type of agents. They're kind of the basic foundation, if you want, for many of the activities which you potentially want to enhance with an agent
Mm.
which is more cognitive. And this is where, in the space of negotiations, where you're currently seeing some first activities taking place. So there are actually organizations and companies who are already moving into the space of autonomous sourcing for specifically the low complexity goods and services, right? They're
Mm.
based on rule sets, based as well on given conditions. The AI engine will be going out, tendering out very simple quotes for specific goods and services, and based on set rules, we'll be then looking at the responses of a supplier. We'll potentially go back and forward with clarification needs, and we'll then come back to the human in the loop, as we normally say that, as well for a final decision making or
But
awarding,
do you have
right?
concrete cases for that, Pedro? You've heard about those, seen
Yeah.
those companies.
Yes, I mean, there's a big one which is very popular as a use case, and that is Walmart. So they've been using that particularly for their so-called not tactical, for their so-called tail spend, which is the very fragmented spend, which procurement people have a hard time to really have time for,
Mm.
right? This is the really fizzled out spend, which causes 80% of the pain and transactions, but maybe only 20% of
Yeah.
the value, right? And in that space, there is this classical use case, which a lot of companies talk about with Walmart, but there's more than that. There's as well some oil and gas companies which have already used autonomous agents for these type of negotiations of low complexity type of spend, with an AI agent obviously being employed, right?
Mm. But I also heard you say on that. I still think it. There's a lot of questions on how does it choose who to ask and how does it all those decisions right where I could be
Mm-hmm.
No, you've tried using the Bing search, right? I think I also mentioned that in my last podcast with Pascal that I don't use it. I still don't see the value in those things,
What of
but it,
Bing?
it often leaves yeah, Bing AI search, for
Yeah.
instance, or Google AI search,
Mm.
because it seems to leave out some things that are important to leave out, and sometimes include things that should not be there. And that would just be my first top of mind. If it can't even Google correctly, would I have it choose the vendors I want to bid for my toilet paper procurement?
Well, I guess for the cases which I'm talking about, which is tail spend, you have actually two options, right? You completely leave it unattended and you do nothing with it because you don't have the
Mm,
capacity usually to address it, or you find a strategy for that. And there's different sets of strategies. One of them could be that you really have a simple agent bringing back to you some simple quotes with a better price, which at the end is always going to be better than having a strategy which is do nothing, right? So from my
mm,
perspective, that's a kind of a mindset for tail end spend, which I think you need to as well check, right? Do you really leave it unattended? Do you do something with it? If you do something with it, do
yeah.
you channel it via an outsourced provider, or do you actually add to it maybe a kind of a mechanism which allows you to quench an additional dollar out of it without having to spend too much time focused on the activities which lead to that, right?
Yeah, but it taps into something I'm always saying, right, and also putting into a formula. I think in my next PowerPoint is that there are three ways we usually in business support, at least, or in the finance area, that I spend a lot of time in. Would approach innovation with technology. There's the core systems. You need to optimize those and
Yeah.
modernize those,
Mhm.
and then there's all the things you're doing today. You need to optimize that and make it automate it, basically what you're already doing. But then there's also the potential to do things that you're not doing today. And I think
Yes.
actually with AI, that is where we have probably the biggest potential, because we're really
Exactly.
good at transactional structured data. We've been doing that for 60 years. But working with these unstructured, more ad hoc, undeterministic cases is where we have a potential to do things if we accept there might be some hiccups along the way, right? And that's actually what you're talking about as well, right? You have the choice either to say we won't do anything about it, or say, okay, let's do something with an AI we know is a bit flawed, and then control whatever comes back to us, right?
Absolutely, and this is just coming back to what we were discussing earlier about spend and let's say as well the potential technologies which AI offers. It's really like having now a new Swiss Army knife, right? Now you have a
Mm,
possibility to actually go after use cases which you were not able to go after before.
yeah.
Maybe you'll get now in front of you because of the AI engine coming back with some insights, a possibility to actually look at recommendations which you haven't even thought about before because you just simply didn't have the time, didn't have the capacity, didn't have the, let's say, the
Mm.
performance as well to really crunch the information in different angles and with different simulations in mind. So it's really enabling you to now do things differently, maybe do things which are new to you, and potentially do things better as well.
Exactly, and that's also what you said before with finding the tricky parts in the RFP documents you're getting in, and the contract templates you're getting in. Finding the tricky parts, that's something that we're not good at doing today, or we don't do adequately today. So that's again the same thing. We can have it do things that will only complement us and make us able to do things we are not doing today, right?
Absolutely, and really spot these. We call them the Lego bricks, right? I talked
Mm.
about this recently, right? There's this paradox called the Lego pain paradox. I don't know if you heard about that, Lasse, but probably if you've got kids and they have Lego, you've definitely felt it, right? And these are the issues which seem very small. Right, but when you trip on them, they're really, really massive, right? And this is kind of a point you have to bear in mind. Some of what AI can do is actually take away that risk, which is tripping over some of these clauses in a contract, which potentially have downstream effects or impacts, which could be much bigger than what you're anticipating when you're just reading the
Mm.
statement, right? And kind of that is the Lego pain paradox elimination, which AI potentially could help with as well.
Yeah, but it's also, to some extent, contracts are sometimes you. Let me put this the right way. Sometimes you suspect that contracts were made deliberately complex, right?
Or for for people who want to just skip over them, right? There's just manuals in many occasions, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's so complex that no one really reads them afterwards. But then you suddenly have an AI that's able to actually read it and put it into context, probably, and maybe help us find some of those things, right? That we need to
Exactly.
look at. And that brings me to to another question, right? So this gap between a very thorough procurement process and contractual negotiations,
Yeah.
and then an inadequate implementation and operationalization afterwards of contracts and agreements in the organization. How do we overcome this gap between the meticulousness of the procurement process and then a completely different reality when we are operationalizing the contract?
And this is where the rubber hits the road, right? So to speak.
Mm,
And to be honest, this is a massive pain point for many organizations to address. It's a really crucial aspect because, negotiating better price and conditions, but not really bringing them into execution does not generate value. The value is in realizing what you've actually negotiated in terms of better terms, in terms of better pricing, potentially as well, a change of supplier, right? And so
mm,
just thinking about that, the contract details themselves, they have a structure which is hard to bring into execution, right? They do have a lot of terms and clauses, as we were just talking about, so conditions which you need to be aware of, but at the same time they have a lot of detail as well, which you now need to translate into data points within your
mm,
ERP system, within your contracting system, potentially as well, in case that's not yet there, in as well your payment systems as well, when you double check as well on the details of the payment terms, right? So
mm.
that really is a true pain point, which I've been through as well in some of my previous implementations, and is difficult. And one of the reasons is because usually there is, from a data structure perspective, a lot of work to do to really make sure that the master data is reflecting all of the information which you have negotiated at the supplier level, at the
Mm.
plant level, at the entity level, at the payment term level. So there's so many data points you need to get right, and where automation could really help you address that gap. That really means taking in all of these contract details, converting them into almost pre-filled templates, so that you can actually absorb them into your transactional system. That's one way to address that. The second thing is to keep monitoring as well what's actually going on
Mm.
between the contract and what you have in an executional system after you have implemented or operationalized the contract, and really making sure that you're not missing out on any leakage, right? Because, like I said before, there is a lot of data to triangulate, and many times what could happen is that there is suppliers who are part of a bigger organization, not recognized for that, but are still carrying a very short payment term, although you have negotiated a better term with the parent company. These
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
things you really need to make sure that they equate. But most importantly, as well, thinking about operationalization of contracts, or bringing actually the procurement value negotiated down into implementation, it's as well about creating the visibility of what you have negotiated with the people which are then requiring to consume, or requiring to establish relationships with these suppliers, potentially then go after as well their needs, and therefore as well requisition against that contract, right? Creating that visibility and really helping people to understand that they have to know where to look for, or the systems giving them the information preemptively that there is a contract in place is really, really important.
I think you're touching upon all the right points here. I love that. So I obviously had a lot of thoughts in my mind, and you're just touching upon all of it, Pedro. So that's
Okay.
perfect. But but for me, one of the things that it's not just about the company procuring. It's also about the service company. Sometimes they I've been working in facility management, and one of the key headaches in facility management everywhere is that you end up doing too little. Of you've agreed something in the contract, but your frontline workers don't know that you had to have to perform this,
Hmm.
so that's a risk. And then the worst one is doing things that you're not getting paid for, right?
Oh
So,
yeah.
cleaning the toilets. Okay, I cleaned all the toilets. Oh, but you had to look at the definition. A toilet is only if there's not a bath connected to it or something like that, right? And then suddenly we've done things we shouldn't clean, right? Because there's someone else takes all the baths or whatever. You get my point. And that controlling, maybe looking at work orders before they reach the frontline worker.
Yeah.
You having an AI look at that, seeing is this service that they're asking us to perform actually part of our agreement, is extremely valuable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another aspect which I've seen now in another use case where AI could was really helping is identifying, and this is for transport and logistics, right? Really identifying, where's the bucket of express orders coming from, which have never been established as kind of the basic service we want to
Mm,
be actually. Using from a specific logistic provider. But what we could see is that there was quite a big growth of express service happening, which were going against the contracted rates and were going against the patterns we were actually anticipating. And so spotting these differences of
Mm.
contract versus operations is truly, truly important. Some
Yeah.
companies, what they do is they put a vendor management process in place, right? Which kind of translates the details of a contract, the service levels which you have agreed, particularly when we're talking about service companies, and then do against that, match all of the activities which are happening in operations to spot all of these gaps or potential discrepancies where there are new conversations needed with your own employees to make sure that they understand what the details are of the contracts, the standards potentially you have contracted, or
Mm.
the services which are in versus out of scope. But then you have as well with the service provider a responsibility as well to regularly check on performance and really make sure as well that you potentially plug the leakage there, right?
Yeah, so it's like having a child, right? It's like you get a child and you imagine you're just sitting there and it's all nice and fussy and spending time doing Instagram photos, but in reality you're waking up at night and doing something completely different. And that problem with signing a contract based on some assumptions on what's actually going to happen, and then suddenly the business starts buying other things, or something else happens, or there is a small something you
Yeah,
saw as a small part of that agreement that suddenly becomes inflated and
exactly.
becomes the main part of the agreement, and then you need to go back and rethink it again.
I
So
think you're right
analyzing
about the
that and
kids, right? It's I wouldn't want to say it's disciplinary, but it is kind of as well a moment where you have to reach back out and educate, right?
yeah, yeah, both that, but also set your own expectations straight, right? So when you get your second kid, you should know how it was with the first one, right?
You should remember at least. I think some of us have remembered that 3 times.
But there's also a lot of compliance regulations on procurement usually in companies and things they need to adhere to. But is that actually enlarging or reducing the gap between operationalizing contracts and making the contracts?
Well, and that's a it's a pertinent question, right? Because in procurement, there's actually a lot of requirements coming together. There's not just the
Hmm.
business requirements coming together from kind of the side of goods and services and the needs. There is as well regulations coming in towards the process. There's control checks, there's compliance. So there's a lot of these activities as well, which are burdening up a little bit the procurement process, right? With a risk that procurement becomes the police for the whole organization on how things need to get done, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, we all know that the procurement process itself has as well this aspect of being, an area of risk for fraud, an area of risk for
Mm.
potential issues from a let's say from a delegation of authority perspective, potentially as well arm's length when you take transactional decisions, right? So from that perspective, there is this need that compliance will need to be somehow built in. From my perspective, rather than thinking about compliance as being a big burden, the question is how do we make compliance um, an afterthought, right? So how do we push that into the back of let's say the activities we do by having it embedded in all the things we do? For instance, by having AI helping us to understand regulations or compliance related needs as we draft our contract, right? Bringing up the clauses which potentially are standards now for the company, potentially standards for ESG, potentially standards as well, or watchouts as well when we do negotiations with certain markets. Or when we look at the more transactional procurement activities, I'm talking here about requisitioning, PO processing, and invoicing, checking then on the invoice side itself, whether or not there is actually a potential for fraud, a potential for duplicates, a potential as well that someone is slipping in an invoice, right, which they just want to
Mm.
get paid, right? So these are the kind of things which you can build into the processes through technology. And with that, it deburdens the activities which you may have then in the center within procurement to police all of this, because that's not really the value of the function. The value of the function is not policing, the value of the function is to create value.
Mm. But the problem is that it's very strictly right, or maybe not strictly, but the point is a lot of procurement somehow becomes a mirror on how the company operates on a whole. That's what you said as well. It represents every compliance check
Mm,
from every department in the entire company. But the and a contract, in my opinion, is meant to be something that represents the entire company and thus not is not a person dependent
correct.
object or
Yeah.
artifact. But often it becomes this way that the person who's been involved in the negotiation, the project leader for that one, is the only one afterwards who actually understands the contract and why we
Yeah.
made these things and these changes, and and then you end up with such a complex construct trying to represent everything that it represents no one.
And this is a big risk when you think about policies as well, right? Classically, the procurement policy is representing the interests of the company, right? To make sure that
Mm,
there is a process in place which assures that you go after for the external spend which you're engaging suppliers with, you have the right standards being applied, you have as well the right processes being applied, you have as well the right principles being applied,
mm,
right? So yes, you do have the subjugation under the umbrella of procurement with the policies, potentially with the contract you were just mentioning. I think, from my perspective, this is really where technologies can actually help to deburden, as I just said before, by helping you understand these things rather than having to screen through all of the clauses yourself. Get kind
mm.
of a summary of these are the risky points which you have in the contract. These are potentially the consequences if you don't address them. These are the must-haves which you have to immediately address. Right? Kind of getting that
Mm.
view is certainly going to be helpful.
Yeah, because I've tried my own myself, right? Once, I just asking, could we maybe do this on a light contract? Make it the 50-page version we have,
Mm,
template we have, and then procurement came, or legal and procurement in conjunction came back and said, no, we need to do it on this 350-page template. And then you just know this is not. No one's ever going to know what I wrote in this because and even some of those pages I don't know what was in it, right? And that's a
crazy.
problem, right?
Yeah.
That is a crazy problem.
Mm,
But what you're actually saying is, this is something I'm at least saying also in the market, is that we can actually use technology or AI right now to comment on these processes that could potentially involve contract interpretation, right? Like
mm,
paying an invoice. Is this according to due date? Is this according to price list? Like performing a work order. Is this something that's included or excluded
exactly.
in the contract? And that's what you're talking about, right? So actually putting it in as an intermediary. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Or translator?
It's kind of an assistant which helps you understand what's actually going to be the best decision for independent clauses you may have there, or the totality of your contract in relation to what you already have in your business agreed, or what you have as code of conduct, or what you have as regulations
Mm.
as well to kind of follow.
So, uh, a little shift in perspective here. I think was a brilliant discussion, and I think the core challenges of procurement is very, very clear here, and I really love that. Also, the potential with AI. Um, but when we're doing the negotiations, and you talked about using AI also for that part of the process, right?
Mm,
So. One of my key points is often that human bias is not explainable. So we make a choice, we make it based on our gut feelings. We can do that at least, right? We try with procurement to make sure it's not that, but we know that's not
mm.
a bulletproof process, right? Algorithmic code, though, is supposed to be explainable. So, what are some of the challenges that you could see in the procurement when presumptions are put into hard code, or if people don't want a certain vendor for certain reasons, but the AI algorithm would say this is the right vendor.
Yeah, and I think just coming back to the point we were discussing before about negotiations, right? I was just giving a quick glimpse of what is possible, right? But in
Yeah.
reality, I think most of the activities on the tendering side are still quite very human, right? You need to take human
Mm,
decisions, and then the question comes up, right? If you compare now a machine with a hard coded or pre coded set of rules and decisioning logic, right? Is it going to be better than the human after all? And
mm,
and there are some people who think, yes, they're going to be actually better judges because you have a very logical way of coding your decisions. Whereas
yeah.
on the human side, you have a different approach, right? You are basing yourself so you're basing yourself out of the experience, potentially the bias you take along as well because of the way you have collaborated with certain suppliers, your
Yeah, exactly.
preferences potentially as well, and the influence of the sales guys, for instance, who already did a good job as well to give you a certain opinion about how things are gone. So there is actually this kind of conflicting set of interests, right? So are we going to be better off having a machine negotiating for us with the set rules, or have we rather got a human taking the better judgment? And from my perspective, the human beats the machine in most cases where it's more complex, right? So human judgment is flexible, right? This is something which machines usually are not, right? So in situations where you are in a negotiations where you need to take maybe a longer term perspective, I'm pretty sure that a human will have a bigger picture view and will understand the consequences of taking a decisions in a broader sense of what the relationship with that supplier could potentially deliver to you, right? Whereas I think
Mm.
a machine may not have all of these facts, may not take these opportunities as opportunities, but take them as potential errors, right, or as pitfalls,
Mm.
and from that perspective, may not be that flexible to really make choices which are in the best interest of a company, right? So thinking a little bit about the codification again, so I think yes, bias is something you can maybe code out to some degree, as long as you know who's actually pre-coded it, right? Which, from my
Mm.
perspective, is very important as well. It's going to be then, if you start coding all of the decision
Yeah.
making logic, really, really important as well to understand who owns that logic, what was the preset conditions for that logic, and is that something I need to be first trained on to understand what's happening in there, so that I'm not falling into the trap that there is something packaged up for me which at the end is not in my best interest, right? So
Yeah.
having
Exactly.
that really that real perspective there on the transparency of what is in the algorithm is going to be super important as well, right? But again, just closing out on the topic from my perspective, if it is if these are topics which require flexibility, if they are topics which are innovative, which you need to deal with or negotiate, they maybe require as well human expertise to a degree which a machine cannot cover. I think it's logical that a human judgment will always prevail, right? If there are obviously simple things, rule set, preset conditions, they are topics which are just facts driven themselves without necessarily any additional thoughts needed, then a machine can do them probably as good.
But I think first of all, you don't get to decide if we're closing out the discussion.
Ah, no, closing out this point. Wow.
No, no, sorry.
That was your
Just
algorithm telling me this, I'm pretty sure.
I couldn't help
But
commenting on it. No, but no, so because you're saying some things that I think actually is contrary a little bit to what we're trying to do with the procurement process, because we're trying to make scorecards and make these things seem objective, right? When you go to your steering committee for your big procurement processes, and they want to see you've been objective in evaluating what is actually who's the best vendor, right? But you're saying so that means there should be scorecards, right? That could be filled out and be, of course, you'll always have this. Sometimes you'll have this weird quality thing where you can put
the
everything into it.
qualitative aspects, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. But we can always. But the point is, we want to make this transparent. We want to make this explainable. We want to make this precise to some things we've decided this is what we buy based on, and that's what I think we will do in public procurement, for instance, because that's where you don't want to have a you don't the public administration is cumbersome because we don't want to have someone making a decision. We want to have the system making a decision. So the AI is sort of a system par excellence to do that, right? So are we by saying that the human is always better at choosing that there's something here, oh, that could be a potential, or this person is nicer for me to drink a beer with, or I'd rather have teams discussion with Petro than Lasse. uh, are we? Isn't that sort of moving against two things? Isn't that sort of moving against the whole procurement idea? And two, if not, what is the public authorities when they do tenders missing out on then if they don't allow for the human judgment?
Well, both very good questions, right? And let me see if I can remember whilst I'm answering the questions. So first of all, just as I mentioned earlier, if it's facts-driven decision making, right, you're just comparing apples to apples, right? There is a straight
Mm,
process there which tells you how to then make your decision with a scorecard, which in the back is already pre-weighted because that's what you do before, right?
mm,
Then I'm pretty sure that machines can actually help procurement to get to facts driven decisions, right? Or at least recommendations, which you can then take forward and do a final check on and then potentially award, right? And this is the point you were just mentioning about with regards to public procurement, right? Where there is a lot of codified ways you need to do
mm,
things, right? There is actually as well new regulations which came out not too long ago for public procurement as well, right? And from that perspective, there is actually a clear path and a step-by-step approach how you need to complete your tendering and awarding, right? So from that perspective, you do have with a machine really a very strong engine or capability which allows you to take away that that doubt which you may have of bias, that doubt you may have of influence, if you really just compare the facts, right?
Mm.
But on top of that, there is as well the professionalism of a procurement person. Usually, it's a key commodity manager or a buyer, right? Who adds to that as well an additional view, which you may as well require as well to consider, and that is the identification whether or not these are true offers, right? So the offers really are meeting the conditions which you have. For instance, you could have in the offers a fact-based decision that the lowest priced wins, but that lower price maybe with a supplier you don't not necessarily want to be taking on board because there's a
Mm.
history of that supplier of not having met with the conditions or the performance, right? So there is usually a human addition needed to really take that full final view, and with that as well a scrutiny as well of
But
what
isn't
the
that
machine
just
has.
a bad algorithm, and you just need to design your algorithm better to look at how the performance has been with the supplier in the past, right?
Well, there could be many different conditions coming up there, right? There could as well
Yeah.
be a supplier which is now in the market already having noise because they're not meeting up with the condition of another company, right? There could be so
Mm.
many different things where just codifying everything is just not possible because it would need you to really have a vast database available to you of information, of context,
Mm.
of criteria in order to compare, right?
So that's how you are saying you don't believe in AGI.
AGI is a concept which, is, from my perspective, is still out there. I'm not necessarily yet at the stage where AGI for me is something which is realistically achievable within the next 5 years. Right? Is it going to be there in 25 years? Most likely, I'm going to ask my sons to look out for it and let me know. But generally speaking, I think we're really making good evolution right now with the space of AI.
Yeah, but my point was just, you said, exhaustive context, right? And that
Yeah.
is, in my opinion, that is almost that should be the definition of AGI, right? You say
Yes.
we can't do that. You can't have that exhaustive context in an algorithm. You just said that, and that's why I.
Well, yeah, but I mean AGI again. There's different believers, right? Am I going to
Yeah,
see AGI taking place in the next 5 years? I can clearly take my position here. No,
yeah,
but are we going to see AI agents which are going to help us really make better decisions? Absolutely yes.
yeah, yeah. Good answer. But I think also your answers on the algorithmic procurement process are really really good. I think also there's something here in saying that organizations are sort of made up of people. It's about people, groups of people joining together to interact with other groups of people, and and
It's all
and you
about
need to
people.
have some. Yeah. You need to have the people aspect in it, right? It has to reflect the people in the organization to some extent, or else it becomes something static in some ways, right?
Mm.
Or
And we have experience with that
synthetic.
in procurement, right? I think 20 years ago we started with e-auctions. I don't know if that concept is known to you,
Mm,
where we were auctioning out goods and services for suppliers to give us a bid, right? So we know that not everything can be auctioned, right? By
no.
now, we know as well that the people aspect is important in order to take really good decisions for very complex undertakings. But we know as well that for the, let's say for the 80/20, taking the 80/20 standard for the really low complexity type of spend, the so-called tail spend, we can really as well systematize the way we go about it with technology.
Yeah. So, Pedro, what are your key recommendations for people who want to advance in procurement technology?
Well, looking a little bit across what we have seen now taking place in the last few years, it's actually a field where technology is are coming together from all sorts of angles, right? And just talking about intelligent automation as an example, right? Almost every single case in the automation box or toolbox is actually applicable to procurement. So, from my perspective, if you're really interested in technology, procurement is actually a prime spot to be. The reason why is because it offers you unstructured data use cases, it offers you
Mm,
structured data use cases, it offers you abilities to look for data insights, it offers you as well abilities to automate and make and streamline processes and activities, right? So it does really have the full bouquet, and with that, the ability for you to bring in all of your capabilities if you want to upskill, right? And so, from my
mm,
perspective, if someone is really keen and already sitting in procurement and want to go after understanding better technologies, there is a simple way to get started, which is simply get involved in projects which you are already running in your organization, and with that, having an ability to be exposed. But besides that, really start a path as well of upskilling. get as well hold of all of the procurement university material which is out there already on YouTube, right? There's a whole university there which you can unlock on at your fingertips if you're really really interested and passionate
Mm.
about, right? And go after these self-learning possibilities for you to really have an ability to beef up your skills, beef up your muscles as well, and have a better understanding. But besides that, what modern organizations would currently as well start providing to you is internal learning opportunities as well, right? There are procurement academies, right, where there is a technology path usually as part of your curriculum embedded, where you're not just being trained on, what is AI, what is automation, potentially
Mm.
becoming a citizen developer, as I've been doing as well with many of my peers in the past, training them up as citizen developers within the RPA space. But you're given as well all of the additional skills which you need in order to make sense out of technology, which is your critical thinking, which is potentially as well, understanding of how to problem solve, understanding as well about how to manage a project, right? All of these additional knowledge bits, which are absolutely a necessity as well when you're looking after an interest, which is to beef
Mm.
your skills up within the procurement technology space with a well rounded kind of curriculum.
Yeah, so impact is more than technology, is what you're saying.
Yes. So it's a mindset shift which you have to undertake as well, right? So it's not
Mm.
going to be about just executing activities. It's going to be much more about how to improve what you actually have on hand.
Mm.
How can I actually get more out of the information which I see from the data?
Yeah.
What are these questions which I don't know about? How do I find them?
Yeah, exactly. But I also think that you mentioned that this is a procurement is a brilliant space for internal automation, and I think I often say that some of the places where you really need automation is when you work with something that's outside of your enterprise architecture to some extent. If you go from an IT perspective, when you have to interact with things that are not under your control, and that is exactly what a procurement process is, right?
Mm,
It's a dance between two entities who wants to interact, and how do you actually interact with that
mm.
external party that you don't control, right? That's a key problem, and that's where intelligent automation always comes in because it can act as a technology layer between companies as well, right?
Absolutely. I think this is a really important aspect you're just bringing up, which is this integration as well of the suppliers and the way they
Mm.
collaborate and the streamlining of the activities, that collaboration between you and the ecosystem of partners you may have out there, which is as crucial as well to be thought about. The other topic as well for anyone in procurement in general, and this is not just for the ones who want to be moving into a career path, which is procurement technology, is that a lot of the goods and services nowadays they have a component of technology as well, right? They have a
Mm.
component of AI. They may have as well an
Yes.
inclusion of algorithms or IP protected type of solutions, which you need to better understand. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be an expert, but you need to start generating an affinity to actually spot these bits and pieces in the contractual arrangements of your supplier, and then be able to put the finger on it and bring in the partners to assess them properly with an understanding as well that these are factors as well which have to be checked, have to be as well potentially from a cybersecurity perspective
But
looked
that
at,
also makes me
etc.
think, right? I've seen requests for proposals where they suddenly for something not completely related to technology, but they suddenly ask for AI, right? How's a procurement professional supposed to handle that? Just you want AI in a process that's not involved, doesn't have anything to do with AI. Isn't that? Are we just is hype going too far now, or what do you think, Pedro?
Well, I don't really think that the procurement person itself needs to have the expertise to assess what is behind that AI, right? But the procurement professional themselves, they need to spot these details, to bring them up in the conversations, to understand what's actually behind it, right? And then bring in the right people to do the assessments when needed.
Yeah, but
Now,
for us, we've had
yeah,
we're a consultancy company as
yeah.
well. We had a company who asked for something completely different, but then there was just a flavor of you also need to show AI capabilities.
Yes, which is nowadays kind of becoming a general question where everyone answers with the same answer, which is AI is in it, right? Remember, this is kind
Yeah.
of the AI washing machine effect, right? There's everything and
Mhm.
and AI, right? But from my
So the
perspective,
tender will just have a section being written by Gen AI, right? Just Chat
I
GPT.
guess
Is there anything else
they
you need from me? Or
yeah, yeah, it's kind of let's really make sure that I'm going to be in there, right? But
yes.
and that is something to be honest, where anyone who writes a good request for proposal will need to watch out for, right? Are we asking for things just because, or are we asking for things because we want to be protecting ourselves, or
Mm.
are we asking for things because we truly want them, right? And so, in the
Yeah.
conversations when I would be receiving such a RFP, and I was on the consulting side in my past, right? This is a key question to come back to the professional who's actually submitted that RFP. What are your key criteria, and what are all these factors actually doing
Mm.
for you, right? And this is from my perspective really really important, particularly because everyone is now asking these questions about, you know, give me
Yeah.
AI in some form or shape. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're all buying AI, and no one's really know what they're buying. It's just a, it's I think it's dangerous in a process like procurement to just put in a word like AI because it is
No,
such a
it's different meanings.
it's
Mm.
yeah, and it's starting to represent the entire in technology flux that we're in, right?
Yeah.
It's just all of it, right? Every algorithm is an AI today, right? Um, what core challenges should procurement professionals focus on to conjure up relevant strategies with technology?
Well, from my
Is it this operationalization that we're talking about? Is that the core challenge?
Well, that's one of the big challenges. I think the other one is, from my perspective, data quality in itself, right?
Mm,
So initially, we were speaking about the fact that procurement really sits at the interface of many different functions. It sees as well all of the spend which is flowing through flowing out of the company, so to speak, and then it has all of these partners as well to integrate into the process and activities, right? uh, on top of it, all of the compliance aspects you were just talking about earlier.
mm,
So, from my perspective, to really advance the agenda of procurement, there is due care needed on the data quality side for all of the information, which is crucial, right? And that includes a lot of the master data information, supplier data. It's including as well your goods and service information. It includes as well information which relates to ESG as well, right? Which is flowing through the transactions, but you potentially are not capturing because there is no way or there's no standards to do so, right?
mm,
And this is where, from my perspective, there is a good level of opportunity as well for process orchestration, right? Which is one of the means which helps you to direct these flows into one common application, but at the same time, it helps you as well to translate the data flows by having a common data model in the back, which allows you then to link these transactions in a way which normalizes the information available to you. So having data
mm.
integrity, data quality, and a proper data governance in place is one of these big challenges from my perspective, which professionals need to solve, and need to solve so that they have ESG targets being met, need to solve for productivity and efficiency purposes, need to solve to really have data which speaks to them and is not kind of useless because it's actually not really bringing back a comparable value to you, right?
Yeah, and it also gives it provides the procurement department with the opportunities they need to identify further spend reduction opportunities, right? Quality
Exactly.
improvement
Well, and not
opportunities.
giving you false positives, right? Because this is
Yeah,
something which you many times then have as well, right? The data is not normalized, it's actually not synchronized.
yeah.
And then what you have is you're not having an ability really to ingest further external information and make sense out of it because your internal information just doesn't make sense either, right? So solving that
Mm.
riddle, I think, is one of the prime challenges for the function.
Yeah, yeah. I think Susan Walsh on an episode some months back just kept saying dirty data. Dirty data is the biggest inhibition for all
I'm not
innovation,
sure she
right?
stole that one from me actually, because that's this is one. Dirty data is a very good one, a very good tagline of Susan Walsh, and I like that one. And by the way, is really a good representation of what happens a lot in procurement. Right, there is a lot of data. A lot of the data is dirty. A lot of the data is not contextualized in the right shape,
Mm.
and out of that, you're not really generating these opportunities which you can then go after.
Yeah, it's not just about dirty data. It's also about relevant data. It's also about having
Exactly.
data on a more holistic level, more strategic level. It's not just about cleaning it up. It's about
Exactly.
ontologies and taxonomies and all of that, right?
Building
It's
knowledge and really
yeah,
making it contextual to the procurement function itself, right? And
turning it into insights and information instead of just having data points.
mhm.
So but we just spoke about also this adding AI to tenders, right? Uh, and I think I've been saying a lot on AI in general that we have too much supply right now and too little demand. So there's this strategic deficit in the market that is sort of being fixed with some engineering answers. Is what I usually say, and that sort of means that I also spoke to someone the other day who's a machine learning engineer, and he said,
Mm,
"Oh, I'd like to start my own startup." And I said, "But what's your domain knowledge? And don't just make an app to make an app because you'll be disrupted in a moment. If there's no demand for what you're doing, but you're just doing it because you can, you will end up in a bad spot in 2 years, or you'll have fun doing it maybe, but it'll also I don't think it'll lead to anything.
yeah.
So, do we have right now, in a more procurement analogy, do we have too little demand in AI and too much supply? And what would that, from a procurement professional, what would that scenario actually mean?
Mm. And it's I think we all know that there's been now for a while quite a little bit of a hype. No, not a little bit. There's been a big hype around.
Hy- the biggest hype I think I've ever seen.
There's
Yeah.
been a massive hype, right, for many years in different areas. Nowadays, it's more in the space of AI, right? So, from my
Mm,
perspective, there is an oversupply in terms of technological solutions to what we want to achieve within procurement, and there is actually a lag, right, in many
mm,
organizations to be able to even use these technologies because they first have to fix their process foundation, because they first have to fix their data foundation, because potentially they have other priorities to take care of first, which is better margins, better sourcing strategies, better supplier management, which is needed in order for them to advance and get them the funds for technological solutions which will help them for the next extra 10, 20 to 30% of maturity steps, a step gradient which they potentially want to get to, right? So from that perspective, I'd be saying myself that in observing the market a bit, there is an oversupply of a lot of solutions which are overlapping
mm.
with their
Yeah,
specific
that's my feeling as well.
offerings, right? They are, if they would be all singular solutions, right, and they all have their
Mm,
specific niche, that wouldn't be so much of a matter for decisioning. What is happening right now, though, is a flood of solutions. Many of them don't have a very concise use case, don't have a very concise not guidance, a very concise. Outlook into that domain they're actually serving. They
mm,
potentially lack to understand what is procurement, what is actually the context procurement works in. How do I actually make that make my solution really close to the reality of the function, right? And on the other
mm.
hand, you'll have the organizations which are really just trying to gobble up all of the different technologies which are coming and now have to sort them out and make
Mm.
sense out of them, right? And this is something which I'm observing now for a while. I think there's different depictions right now going around the internet, right? The spider webs showing you thousands of solutions.
Yeah.
There's the Gartner hype cycle with another 25 new solutions emerging before the last one has even been digested. So there's a lot of momentum on the positive side. On the negative side, I think the pace at which these solutions can be absorbed, can really be made sense out of, is much longer than what you potentially are anticipating for everyone to survive, right? So
Mm.
thinking about a balanced approach would be probably better, which basically means taking decisions on choosing the solutions which really create value within your organization, where you have gaps in your modernization of the architecture, where you have really a platform which potentially can help you leverage different assets better, right? Is much a much smarter way to go about things. And then maybe grow these foundational capabilities in parallel, than really starting to just buy things and trying to
But this is a decision, 101 also, almost, right? You're trying to make a decision, but trying to pick a restaurant. But as we go down the road, there'll more and more restaurants keep showing up, so I can't pick the restaurant, right? It keeps on moving to some extent. It's a deflationary market, isn't it? So you sit down and you say, I want to find out what technology we need for procurement, and those 2 months or 3 months you spend doing that, more technology has appeared. And then you need also to change your criteria and your
but I think
selection
you probably
criteria
turn
and
this on the
rates.
head, right? And you rather, the question is, or the point is, what does procurement need in order to meet
Mm.
or to deliver these business targets, right? What's currently what is my current landscape looking like in
Yes.
terms of processes, capabilities, and technology? Where are these gaps which I need in order to complete or actually accelerate what I want to do in a specific area?
So
And
are
what
you
are the
saying do
offerings
not
out
let
there?
your need be dictated by technology advancements?
Correct.
Is that even possible to do? Because don't you do that all the time? Oh, this is now possible, so now we need to have this.
I think if you're I think you have to keep two things in mind. One is your strategy for a longer period of time. This could
Yeah,
be 5 years, right? Which leads you and kind of is connected to the business model which you have in the organization, right? On the other
yeah.
hand, there is these sparks coming in all the time, which you need to assess, right? So there's this innovation happening all the time outside in the market. Now, if you would just go and follow the innovation all the time, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't achieve anything, right? So you'll need to have some stable foundation in place, which you're constantly reviewing, but you're constantly then as well checking against the innovation itself so that you can bring in what makes sense, but at the same time, take out as well what has outdated. And this is all about modernizing your platform with a very close eye out as well on what's happening in the market, but without forgetting your North Star, which potentially is a really solid procurement technology environment, which is helping you to achieve your business goals and not just helping you to get innovation in and out of the door, and with that an ability to maybe frustrate your users, potentially disrupt as well your business, right?
So talk about problems, not technology.
Correct. Talk about the pain points which you want to address.
Mm.
Talk about as well the opportunities, not just the pain points, which you potentially can see coming in as well with new technologies having offerings which can be complementary, right?
Yeah, and avoid putting just AI in your tender material just for the sake of it.
Because you just said it. Absolutely.
Exactly.
For the sake of it.
For the sake of it, exactly. So, Pedro, this has been a real tour de force in procurement and procurement challenges, procurement, what do you call it, raison d'etres and technology. And I think it's been a really, really brilliant discussion. I love it. Honestly, it's also informed me a lot. So thank you for that. And I just have one final question, which is sort of the centerpiece of the podcast, and I hope you're ready for that one.
I truly hope. It's a culmination of the podcast. So
Yes, it is. Now, finally, we get to it, right? So, Petro, what is the only constant?
the only constant in my perspective is that as humans, we thrive to leave a legacy behind, right? And if you think a little bit about humanity and technology hand in hand, right, it's always been about progressing by inventing, by potentially bettering lives of everyone around us with a new approach to doing things, right? Potentially using a stone in a different way, using fire for new means. Out of that, generating new inventions over the last decades and millennials, right? So, from my perspective, a big driver, which I've recognized as well for myself in the last, I would say, probably 4 or 5 years, is to really leave a legacy behind, which others can actually use as a seed for their life moving forward, right? That includes my kids, but it includes as well any companies I work with, right? I try to make sure that when I engage with partners and when I engage as well with companies, that I leave value, I leave potentially as well knowledge there, which people can then harness for them to actually get out of that more than I've probably anticipated myself, right? So this kind of thinking of mortality and at the same time leaving a legacy behind, I think is really crucial, particularly when you reach a certain age. Right, it becomes something which you're starting to thrive forward with, and which is really driving as well the way you do work and in technology, the way you go as well about innovation, because you want to really make sure that what you leave behind is going to be useful for the ones who come right after you. And that could be when you leave a job. That could as well be when you build a new architecture or a new solution. Having that mindset of legacy, I think is really really important from my perspective. And is that factor which in my view has driven now humanity for a long long time, has driven technology, and is the reason why we're doing these things, right?
That's a great answer, Pedro. It made me think of you've seen Gladiator, right?
Yes.
So what we do
I
in
haven't seen
life,
part 2 yet, but I've seen
no,
part
no, but
1.
what we do in life echoes in eternity, right?
Exactly. It will be that echo, and hopefully it's a positive echo, which people take away, and it's not just haunting you, right?
Exactly. Thank you so much for being on the only constant, Pedro. It was a real pleasure, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.